Welcome to Sports Management Podcast, where you will hear interesting sports management professionals share their stories, experiences, and passion for the sports management industry. I am your host, Marcus Philipsson. Welcome to episode 158 of Sports Management Podcast. If you have ever learned anything from this show, please show your gratitude by subscribing to the podcast in your podcast app. And if you feel extra generous, leave a 5-star review. This will help the show grow, and the bigger the show, the bigger the guests. Thank you. Today's guest is Phil Andrews, the CEO of USA Fencing. For those of you who follow this podcast since the very beginning, you might remember Phil from episode 14, then acting as CEO of USA Weightlifting. It was great to have Phil back on the show, and we discussed all the things that have happened since last time. We spoke about why he became CEO of USA Fencing, how Phil helped grow the overall business already in year 1, why fencing is like combat chess, the origins of fencing, how he builds high-performing teams, and much more. Phil Andrews, welcome back to Sports Management Podcast.
Thank you, my friend. How are you doing?
I am very well, and how are you?
Very good, very good.
You were on episode 14 a few years ago, and I'm really excited to have you back. Then you were in the role of the CEO of USA Weightlifting, and now you are the CEO of USA Fencing. So can you tell us a little bit about this new role that you have?
Yeah, I mean, as you say, I came from weightlifting, and it was a very interesting time of my life to see that sport grow and then to change very much in those years. After 10 years, I think it was time for something new for weightlifting too, in terms of their leadership. And I decided to make a change. And then, a couple of months after I made that decision, I got a phone call from a recruiter on behalf of USA Fencing, and they said, we've got some issues at fencing, and we think you might be a great fit. And sure enough, a few months later, we made an agreement, and I ended up here at USA Fencing for the last couple of years. It's been a very interesting, very different set of challenges to USA Weightlifting and the IWF.
So for those who might not have listened to the previous episode, can you give just a brief, background about yourself? I know you have worked in hockey and weightlifting and now fencing. And before we move in and dig deeper into the fencing world.
Yeah, so for those who were on episode 14, well, I apologize, and I would be surprised if anybody remembers that far back. But I'm originally British, as the voice might give away, and grew up playing hockey and rugby, and did a bit of shooting as well, rifle shooting, that is. And anyway, the short story of my career is I started off in professional ice hockey in the Elite League in the UK with Basingstoke Bison and the Coventry Blaze, and then Team GB ice hockey a little bit as a sort of side gig with Coventry. Spent some time in the corporate sector, ended up finding my way back to a place called the University of East London right before the 2012 Olympic Games. Through that, worked with 30 I think it was 32, might be 33 Olympic partners. And now it's a while ago, one of which was the US Olympic and Paralympic Committee, then just the Olympic Committee. And once that was finished, many of the people who visit London come back with those little Big Bens. They cost about £5. And instead, the US Olympic group basically brought me back to the US as a souvenir, which means that surely my commercial value is £3 because I must have been cheaper than the big souvenir Big Ben. Spent some time with consulting with a few NGBs when I got here, and then settled in weightlifting, which had some really great opportunities through the emergence of CrossFit. And spent just about 10 years between USA Weightlifting in a couple of different roles, and then a brief period as interim deputy director and then an interim director general, which is basically CEO of the International Weightlifting Federation. So, very interestingly, in COVID, I ended up running the USA Weightlifting and the IWF all from my front room remotely in Colorado, USA. So that's a brief potted history of me and what I've been doing and the different sports I've worked in.
That's very interesting. And I noticed you said that they called you from USA Fencing because they were struggling. And also during your time in USA Weightlifting, they had also some struggles. So, what do you think it is in your leadership that they want you in the troubled times to help them out?
Yeah, and I think that hasn't always been clear to me, but now as I get, older, one would hope wiser, but maybe not. Then I think I've figured out I'm good at two things. One is change, and the second is growth. So when you need those two things together, or perhaps even growth management might be an extra element of that, then I might be the right person to call. I also have developed somewhat of a reputation for doing things a little bit differently and looking at problems in a different manner too. They have been trying to learn from people outside of my Olympic and Paralympic colleagues. That doesn't mean I don't try and learn from them too when they're doing something great. I want to apply it to what we're doing as well. But I think that's part of it. Ultimately, we did go through some challenges at USA Weightlifting, both with the international challenges that have become quite well known, but also in the way that we grew USA Weightlifting, the way we harnessed the CrossFit movement, the way that we managed growth. And some of those challenges, or some of those happy challenges, I guess is the right word, are certainly present in fencing. So I think that's probably many of the reasons why my name sort of rises up when those things occur. But I also want to make sure to say that there's a lot of people involved along the way. No one does anything alone. You've got boards, you've got staff, you've got volunteers, you've got partners, donors, sponsors. The saying "it takes a village" is really true, especially in sport management. You cannot do a thing just on your own. You could try, but you really do need those people around you to make anything happen.
Yeah, definitely. So at USA Weightlifting, we said there was some issues with leadership. There was also COVID. There were some, doping that they put, some like cycling. It gets a bad rap on that point. So now focusing on USA Fencing, what are some of the issues that they had that now you want to make a change?
Yeah, and look, we had some issues in weightlifting, which that sport is still a sport that I dearly love, and we figured it out and we moved on. Weightlifting appears to be thriving, and it's very exciting to see the success of particularly US athletes heading into Paris, and we're looking forward to cheering them on. With fencing, we had some very similar and very different problems, and in some ways they crossed over. So one of the biggest issues was around safe sport and abuse in sport and cultural issues. And those permeated through the sport, and we're on our way to solving them. I think certainly there's now a trust that USA Fencing really takes seriously reports of abuse, and it doesn't matter who you are in the sport, that you're going to be looked at the same way. Unfortunately, we had to suspend recently, a few months ago, the chair of our board of directors, our president, who was a Hall of Fame athlete as well, Olympian in the sport, very well respected. There isn't a higher level in the sport than that position in many ways. Yet we took action within 24 hours of getting a report. He was suspended from the organization. That case is still ongoing. It's well reported nationally. But it shows, in much as it was sad we had to do that, it shows that people are willing to report issues, and it shows that we're willing to take action. It doesn't matter who you are within our sport, you're accountable for your actions. And I think that's been really important. So there was a lot to do with culture and particularly fighting abuse in sport. And there were some issues, particularly in fencing, which were quite public during the 2020 Olympics, with one athlete who went to the Olympic Games with allegations against him. That wasn't necessarily wholly USA Fencing's fault, but there were some issues that came out of that, which certainly publicly needed addressing. There was also issues in our governance structure and how that was working. There was a significant challenge on our revenue side, where revenue had really dipped, partly because we were a tremendously events-focused organization. So COVID really affected USA Fencing in a way that we didn't necessarily see at weightlifting. And in the organization wasn't necessarily quick enough to respond. One thing we became known for at USA Weightlifting was innovation, quick action, and taking things on head on. Fencing was known more for a more considered, careful approach. At times, that's definitely warranted and better than the approach that we, and I guess I, became known for weightlifting. And I think at times you need that approach. With that said, it's unfortunately that approach has allowed fencing to stagnate somewhat. So coming in to solve some of those challenges around culture, some of those challenges around membership trust, some of the challenges around staffing as well, with a lot of the governance issues we had. All but about three of our staff left during the COVID and COVID adjacent times. And then looking ahead towards growth and change, and how we manage what is now a growing sport in the United States, how we change our event structure to A, maximize the event experience, B, maximize revenue. How do we build a commercial structure? How do we address clubs being capacity in some areas? And how do we move the sport into being from, this is very similar to weightlifting, being from an older, very well-respected long-term Olympic sport into a modern sport that's designed for the age of social media, for the age of innovation, for the age of AI, and so forth.
No, that's really interesting. And in the research that I did, I have found some things that you did change, and they, touch upon many of the points that you mentioned here with some of the issues. So one of them was with the suspended board member. So I know that you launched a series of DEI initiatives.
We did.
Do you want to talk a little bit about those?
Yeah, so our DEI initiatives. So fencing compared to weightlifting is a very affluent sport in general. Very much concentrated in the United States along the coast. So the big cities that everybody's kind of heard of: New York City, Boston, DC, San Francisco, Los Angeles. It's not to say there's nothing down the middle, but that's where our big numbers are. What we call Region 3, the Northeast, and what we call Region 4, which is really California and the major Western states adjacent to California. And that has its own challenges. Weightlifting was much more of a blue collar sport, much more present in the southeast of the United States and so forth. So very different demographics. One issue that we've had in fencing is building a major sense of diversity, both of diversity of thought in our governance processes and bringing different voices in there, but also into our membership base, both from a perspective of how do we expand our diversity within our membership, coaching base, and so forth, but also how do we make our sport accessible to those without financial means. So we put in place an award-winning program named Fencing the Gap, which literally does as it says. It's designed to fill the gap in that financial expenditure between the two. We've also brought in things like the Women's Mentorship Program, designed to promote women's coaches. That now coupled with bringing in what we launched last week, actually, the club incubator program. If anyone's familiar with universities and the way they incubate startups, it's basically the same thing, where we're working with investors and information that we can garner from the market to really help people build those clubs. One of the important factors in that is women's coaching, because what happens a lot of the time in club-based sports like fencing is that the clubs tend to be owned by the head coach, or at least partially or majority owned by the head coach. Those coaches are often male, and therefore the highest the female really great coach might be able to get is assistant coach, because they can't be promoted to head coach without buying the company. So part of the idea behind the Club Incubator project was as well expanding our clubs, because that's where you see new members, new fences, and potentially new territories for us, is to promote those women into that head coaching position potentially. We've also now built the same thing out with regards to college coaching in the US. The NCAA is a really big deal. Again, a big difference between fencing and weightlifting, and being able to prepare coaches to be able to be a really great collegiate coach, which is very different to being a club coach. At the club, you've got the business side, but the big thing is, how do I make a really great FASA barista foilist? That's the number one thing. And in college, a lot of people think it's the same, but it's not really. A lot of the college coaching position is about program management. compliance, recruiting, budget management, all of that is very much encompassed in being a collegiate coach. We've built that out in partnership with the US Coaching Federation for fencing, USFCA. And we're now building out clubs excellence programs, looking at, okay, what did you do to promote women's fencing? Women's fencing is just over 30% of our audience right now, so it needs to be closer to 50, obviously. We do really well internationally for women, but we need to be a little bit better in terms of our percentage of our membership. So put in place quite a lot of programs, again, learning from some of the things we did at weightlifting, certainly, but addressing some of the problems that exist in fencing that didn't as much exist in weightlifting. And that's not to say weightlifting was better, it's just to say it was different.
Yeah. So you said the gender split is 30% to 70?
It's in that region. It's 60 something to 30 something. I apologize, I don't have the exact number to me.
But approximately, yeah. I feel like fencing would be a sport where, women really can excel as well.
Absolutely.
Being fast and agile. And so it seems like a sport that could be way more than 30%.
It is. And actually, there's some really great things that are happening that support that. We have more women's programs in the NCAA. We're currently working with the US Olympic and Paralympic Committee and the NCAA to create a women's championship for fencing in college. There is more college opportunities for women. Women are the fastest growing sector of what we do. Asian American women in particular are fast growing. And if you think about it, that's probably a lot down to Lee Kiefer, as well as other factors, but certainly Lee Kiefer winning gold in Tokyo has helped us and show the power and success of, to your point, fast, agile, athletic Asian American women in our sport.
Interesting. Moving on to a different challenge that you mentioned on the financial side and growing the overall business. I read that in the first year, you managed to grow USFA by approximately $3 million.
About that, yes.
How did you make that happen?
So there was a number of things that happened. When you grow by that sort of amount as a percentage of your overall revenue, one portion of that always has to be luck, and I want to acknowledge that, and or timing. It was very similar in weightlifting. We had CrossFit, which, yes, we managed it really well. There was a huge factor in our growth. Here, we expanded our events portfolio. That was probably one of the biggest drivers in expanding that revenue. And we have, I think, a set of pent-up demand since COVID. It's very interesting. We've been in this high growth phase post-COVID, and I wonder how much of that is down to people during the lockdown watching films that included the sport of fencing. I wonder how much of that is down to people, finding niche interests during the lockdown. And fencing certainly can be learned through YouTube and so forth. You're never going to get the same experience. It's a combat sport after all, from learning through YouTube that you can do through a fencing club, and you will eventually need to go there. Unlike weightlifting, which you can do in your garage. So I wonder if some of the demand that we're now seeing is partly due to that sort of, okay, well, I found this during COVID, I got really interested in it. And then I went and found a fencing club, and then I fenced locally, and now I'm ready to go to regional and national a year later or so. So I think it was part of that where there was pent-up demand. We also reinvigorated our foundation, and we've had record years now coming into our third year of that each year for building our foundation, and we've staffed that out. We've brought on some pretty significant sponsor income, much more candidly than I expected when I first started looking for sponsors in fencing. Our membership has responded really well to some of the ways we've structured those partnerships, and we've done it so that sponsors can really see the return on investment. In other words, like dashboards in hockey, we have a similar thing alongside the strips in fencing. Well, with very large amounts of people coming to our events, then we have a logo, and then we'll have so let's say it might be, I don't know, Marcus's widgets with a QR code right next to it. It takes me to a landing page so we can know who bought, what they bought, how much they bought of it. And the business sees that too, which is really great for those D2C businesses, direct-to-consumer businesses who can really track those sales through. And that's where having the type of audience that we do and knowing a lot about our audience has really come into play. And this is where, again, taking a different approach to the standard sticker on the side of a uniform type sponsorship has been really beneficial to us. And I think you're seeing the same thing from sports properties who've taken a little bit of a different approach. They're reaping those rewards. I highlight our colleagues at US Sailing have done really well with this as well. Same thing. They have a guy there who's done very similar work in just, all right, how do we adapt this for our space that's different from a pro league or different from a college, and different from in the US, particularly different from those sort of city-based, regionally based teams. And the reason I say that is in the US, a lot of spend is regionally focused, even from national brands. They'll have regional focuses. Let's take cars. The way that car sponsorships usually work is that money is pulled from local dealerships and regional marketing spend. So therefore, when you're trying to do a national agreement, it's actually more challenging because, especially for brands like us or properties like us who are niche in nature, because first of all, you've got to go overcome why sponsor fencing or tiddlywinks or table tennis or taekwondo, whatever it might be. And then you've got to get over, okay, well, where does this spend actually come from and how does the ROI work? So thinking differently in the way that we do that and approaching brands that make sense with that has really been successful on the sponsorship side. Then it's been incremental. We've developed some new and interesting ways to drive revenue through the business. Everything from e-blast for camps to photography. We're building out a webcasting platform right now, which is actually remarkably challenging in fencing because of our number of fields of play that we have in an event. And in any event in fencing, you're going to see somewhere between 65 and 100 fields of play, depending on the event, which means you need 65 connections, 65 upload links, 65 times that amount of data going in. You also need to be able to track every person through each and every one of those pistes. Then you need to be able to have enough camera length to see the whole piste, which is challenging because a piste is 55 feet long by 5 feet wide. So you need just enough to turn the camera this way and that way. So that's been a large project to build out. We've gone into schools partnerships as well with private schools across the country. Another thing we've done is partner with an Asian provider of private education, similar to the PGA and AC Milano, where we're putting USA Fencing's brand into Asia, particularly into China. And why are we doing that? It's because it supports the NCAA programs. They're very interested in recruiting out of those Southeast Asian markets. We brought back the international regional circuit for similar regions. So we actually, as USA Fencing, do events in partnership with Absolute Fencing in Hong Kong, China, we're in Korea. We're doing Great Britain this year as well. So there's been quite a few different things that we've done. It's not really one thing. And as I say, there are luck and timing is part of it. And anytime you get a huge percentage increase in a revenue base, which I think I've done now 3 or 4 times in my career, there's always an element of circumstances that go along with that too.
Of course, but it can, if you have done it, as you said, 3 or 4 times, then it's not only luck, but of course it might play some part.
Yeah, I mean, you pick your parts too. It's you got to look for the luck as well as as have the luck. It's it comes back to no one does anything alone. It's a lot coming down to partnership and relationship building, and working with those people around you. I'm very, very lucky, and part of the reason that we've been able to achieve things perhaps arguably faster in fencing than we did in weightlifting is because I've got an amazing team around me of individuals. And and to be fair and honest, you learn as well. As you get more experience in your career, things it took me 2 or 3 years to learn at weightlifting, I'm not spending that time learning at USA Fencing. So, and I realize I phrase that in a way which makes me sound like I had a bad team at weightlifting. That is not the case. In fact, one of them is at fencing. So it very much, it was a phenomenal core team that we kept together at weightlifting for several years. And sure enough, through most of the last couple of years, people have come through the front door. We've not had a single person leave. And I think that's always really key. Keeping your staff happy and engaged and giving them freedom to innovate is really a key part of all of those things.
So on this topic, what would be some advice or some tips on how to build high-performing teams?
Number one is an interesting squishy one, which is trust your gut. I will always hire people for culture. the person they are over the skill that they have. So the X's and O's. My gut has proved me right on a number of occasions where I've gone, but the resume on this person makes total sense for what we need. And sure enough, down the road, I've usually ended up parting ways with those people. Building out that team culture, understanding what everybody wants in that team. At USA Fencing, we have a cultural contract that we built with a group called the People Academy out of GB, who've also done work with our national teams. They are really fantastic at that type of work of, okay, what do we all want from this? How do we all want to work together? Not how do I want the team to work together? How does the team want to work together, including with me? I think being clear with people on how you like to manage people, what your perceived weaknesses for yourself are in terms of how you manage them, and giving them that room to be honest, number one, and that's key, but also giving that room to be themselves and do the things that really interest them, as well as the hard and grunt work, which we all don't like to do, is really, really important in keeping people engaged. One thing I've got better at over the years, and I was not always good at this, is encouraging rest and recuperation. I'm less good at encouraging that in myself, but it's a really important thing to ensure people's home lives are taken care of as well. In terms of building out high-performing groups, know the type of person you need based upon that culture. And that will be different for what I need at fencing with the group I've got versus what somebody else might need in, say, a professional baseball team. I need people who can work great all over the country with different time zones and almost all over the world. I need people who can understand the culture of the people that we have to serve, which is our membership. I need people who can work well remotely because we have a lot of remote staff, so could have that trust of people in Pennsylvania or Indiana or California are doing the same as the people you see in front of you in Colorado. If I'm working for a baseball team, I need people who can commit to 82, 86, 80 home games a year, even if you don't make the playoffs. So 80 evenings of your life have got to be taken out, which means I've got to be very focused on people that are very close to the ballpark. I've got to be focused on people who are very sociable in a physical sense before I even get to the X's and O's of what they do. And X's and O's are important. You do need that skill and that knowledge base, those relationships. But I mean, I think for me, the biggest thing that I've learned over the years is recruit for culture first, second, and third, and everything else is beyond that. Look for the personality fit with your team and look at how they hold their relationships. What do people think of them that have worked with them, for them, have managed them? And not what do they think of their work product? That's important. But what do they think of them as a human being and as a person? And I think that's really the key of both of those, particularly when you look at weightlifting's really great, awesome, killer lineup of humans between that sort of 16 and 20 golden era. And then you look at here at fencing with the people that we've got. That's really the key characteristic that comes through is their ability to stay in the horns of dilemma, their ability to be cool under pressure, and their ability to see the forest through the trees. And those are all cliches, but they're actually true in this case.
I think cliches are cliches for a reason, right? Because most of the times they are true.
Exactly, and that's and it's that, and again, these are things that work for me. They may not work for other leaders. But these are certainly items that have proven good for me over time. And setting that culture is really important too. One of the things we did both in weightlifting and fencing was early on, we sat down and set what we wanted to be the culture deliberately, as opposed to just let that evolve. And then you can hold yourself accountable, including you, the leader, to those cultural items.
So do you have some words or phrases that you live by that are part of the culture, or how have you mapped this out?
There's two that I guess I've been known for over the years, which are a little old at this point, but progress, not perfection is definitely one of them. A similar phrase is don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. I think particularly that's important in sport. Sport's always moving. Sport is inherently an event-based business because ultimately sports are events. those events might happen 50, 100, 100, or in the case of in the MLB, 160 times a year. Each one of those is an event. The Olympic Games happens once every 4 years, but USA Fencing sends 140 plus national teams a year. Each one of those is an event. So you're often working against deadlines and times. I think it's worth remembering, in the tech world, they have MVP, minimum viable product. I kind of find the same thought in progress, not perfection. And for disclosure, we stole that from British Cycling when we were at USA Weightlifting. I think I told you that on the last podcast of their influence on us. Part of that as well that we've seen is the answers sometimes lie in your people. And I think every team has a fan base. We have a member base. But most sport organizations have a network that they don't even realize that they have, that has a lot of interesting answers, who know the sport, care about the sport, and have answers to the questions that you pose within your own business. So don't just consult your own people. And then that leads me to my other sort of catchphrase I'm generally pretty well known for, which is it can be done. In other words, sort of the moonshot type idea of, all right, here's where we want to go. Let's figure out how we get there. And some things, yeah, they are completely unrealistic. If we're talking about getting a multi-million-dollar rights deal for a niche sport on a national TV carrier in the United States, yeah, that's practically impossible. Getting on TV is possible. You just do a time buy. But getting to a reasonable, realistic goal that is perceived to be beyond reach, put it up there and work out how you get it. I've almost said an oxymoron there, but the point being, when and how it came about was when we got to weightlifting, the answer was you can't win medals, you can't grow this sport, you can't make this a multi-million-dollar national governing body, you can't make this a medium-sized national governing body, you can't change the culture internationally. And guess what? We did all of that. And here it's sort of a similar thing, is you can't move away from being so events focused. You can't bring sponsors to the table. You can't grow beyond where we are in the women's side of the game. And again, we're proving it can be done. So those are two sort of very short, catchy phrases that I think go along well with what we've done and sort of the attitude that's necessary to get there. And again, that can be applied inside and outside the Olympic movement and really in business too. A lot of what we do is think in terms of USA Fencing, not just as a national governing, as in we make rules and you must obey them. We think in terms of service. So think about a business and you think about how you serve those customers best. How do you serve the majority, 80% or more of your customers really well, 80% or more of the time? Those principles apply. Those people are the people who are buying the tickets, who are buying the merchandise, who are participating in the sport, who are, in our case, paying events fees. They're the ones paying for that photography project I talked about. Those guys are, as a result, customers. And therefore, it's really important to think about this from the customer perspective, their customer journey through the national governing body, and how can you both serve them, but also generate revenue, in other words, build the business through that. And I think that can be applied to business and it can be applied outside of national governing body sport as well.
No, I love that, those catchphrases, and believe them as well. And I've always, I've thought about perfectionism a lot lately, actually. And I have come to what I believe the conclusion in my mind that that's a glorified way of procrastination a little bit.
Yes, completely agree.
It sounds better to say that you're perfect. I didn't do it because I'm a perfectionist, but actually you're just procrastinating. Like you should get it done.
Yeah, I agree, and I'm I'll confess to a little bit of procrastination occasionally.
Everyone does,
and and I work in a little bit in fits and starts in some ways, sort of almost off that adrenaline of getting things done. But I agree. I think there's a large link, if not the same thing, between perfectionism and procrastination. Certainly, where I see people really fall over on perfectionism is starting something but not finishing it and not getting it out of the door. Whereas procrastination, I think, is much more, I'm not even going to start it because I don't think and they can link together. You can be a procrastinating perfectionist.
Yeah, that's true. leaving the business side of the sport for a minute, like I'm interested also in fencing because I don't know how widespread the knowledge is of fencing. And I saw that you described it sometime as fencing is like a combat chess.
Yeah.
Which I think is a very nice explanation. So can you talk a little bit about on the field of play, or how do you call it, about fencing and how it is?
Yeah, so fencing has three weapons: epee, a foil, and saber. So saber is the slashing weapon. The idea in war was that you would kill the combatant, but steal their horse, which is kind of my favorite way to describe it. It's very fast. It's often you see the sort of two athletes really running at each other. There are something called right of way in saber, also in foil, which means it's the easiest way to explain it is a little bit like American football, where you have one team that has the ball and they attack, and then as a defense, and the whole changes in between. Or in baseball, where you have a fielding team and a batting team, or in cricket, the same thing. So somebody has that right of way, and to get the right of way, you have to touch the sword. So there's some interesting battles that happen right in the middle of who had right of way that you see in fencing, in saber and in foil. Saber is the one that you generally see most in films or an adapted form of saber. So Mask of Zorro, Pirates of the Caribbean, obviously the lightsaber is named after Saber, so Star Wars as well. Foil is designed to be, it was the practicing weapon for war. So it was designed to pierce chain link armor. So you're on basically the torso primarily, and that's where the US arguably excels the most, along with Italy. We're very good at saber also. Arguably our best of all time, Marielle Zagunis, was a female saberist. And then epee is very simple in that there's no right of way, so you can just hit anywhere on the body. And that's what the original sport weapon was that was never used in war. It was designed by the French for the sport of fencing. So if you think about what do you need to do in fencing, you need to basically get around the defensives of the other person. So that's where it becomes somewhat combat chess. It's a problem-solving sport that's played first with the brain and second with the athleticism. You need to be tremendously athletic to be an elite level fencer, no question about it. You need to be fast, you need to be agile, you need to be flexible, and in the case of epee, usually taller, in the case of foil or saber, less so. But it's a sport that's really to do with how do I move in a way that my opponent wasn't expecting. You think about it, it's very similar to chess. And I think that's part of the reason why we attract a lot of very thoughtful STEM, technology and mathematics, science-based individuals. You see a lot of fencers go on to be medical, law, engineering particularly, and you see a lot of our success in the NCAA and college world comes in those top universities. Harvard's the current reigning national champions, for example. Our entire men's saber team going to Paris is nicknamed the Gentlemen of Harvard team because it's entirely made up of either Harvard current, incoming, or graduate students.
I'm a tall, slim guy with long arms. Maybe I should have gone into fencing instead of ice hockey, which I never excelled in.
Yeah, I mean, I would argue you might have been a good epeist. The tall, lanky, long-armed individuals tend to be very good at epee.
Maybe that's what I should have done. That or racket sports. I choose wrong. I blame my parents.
Yeah. I mean, and that's funny. It's funny you say that, Marcus. That's kind of what we're trying to do with Fence Across America this summer. So for the first time, we're bringing to 15 iconic sites across America the opportunity to try fencing during the Olympics, because it's the only time you really see fencing on sort of worldwide, very well exposed television. And the idea is to get families out to have their kid grab a sword and try that adventure. Because most of it with niche sports, Marcus, to your point, is the ability to try it. Getting exposed to that sport is, and the sport that speaks to you is point number one. And Jessie, my wife, and I have now a 6-month daughter. I have to hesitate because I keep saying 6-month-year-old, and my wife quite reasonably goes, that's not the case. You can't be both 6 months and 6-month-year-old. And she's right, as usual. But as we think about introducing her to sports, with my wife's sporting background and my own, we're lucky that we know how to. We know how to introduce her to many different sports, so she can find her passion and what her physical attributes and her mental interests will lead her towards. And that's a big part of sport, especially national governing body sport, is, how do you expose that sport, that taste, to people enough to where they get that bug. And to your point, I know you were joking, but in Sweden it's very easy to be introduced to ice hockey. In Great Britain, it's not very easy to be introduced to ice hockey, and that I was really lucky to have that experience. And the world over, maybe except for France and Italy, it's not so easy to be introduced to fencing. You've got to have that first experience with it. And that's a really key thing that I think we can learn around the world in sport, is finding, especially in this world and day and age where the world is becoming less exercise focused. I'm trying to find the right way of phrasing that. How can even governments, ministries of sport and so forth, but us as national governing bodies and national sport federations work together to really expose all of those sports to find the one that really speaks to you?
Interesting. What's the connection to France? Because there are obviously a lot of French terms. On guard is the most common one, I assume.
So, yes, on guard. The sports rules were exclusively in French for many years. Épée is obviously a French word. The history of the sport is that France is the home. They really invented the actual sport of fencing, and I'm taking a little bit away from other parts of history there, but it really is a French home sport. I call it French cricket, which sort of speaks to, you're grinning already, you know what I'm talking about. It speaks to the idea that fencing in France and to a degree in Switzerland, certainly in Italy, is a sport everybody knows and everybody has tried at one point or another. It's not the most popular sport by a margin in all of those countries. It's football or soccer. And it's very similar. It reminds me here of a little bit of baseball here in the US and certainly cricket in the UK, to where not the most popular sport in England by any stretch of the imagination, but certainly everyone has at some point tried and played cricket. Fencing works the same way in France. Very traditional sport for them. And, in a way, coming to Paris for the Olympic Games this summer is very interesting for me to be part of a sport almost going home for the Olympic Games. So, yeah, very interesting to see how that plays out. We're in the Grand Palais, which is a wonderful, older French venue. And we're delighted, quite frankly. It's going to be a great spectacle. And of course, we're hoping to come away with a lot of medals. The French will be strong. Italy will be very strong as well. But we are hoping to keep the pace with both France and Italy in terms of medal count.
Interesting. And a nice summer we have in front of us with the Olympic Games.
Very much. It's most of running a sports business in the US, particularly a sports federation, it doesn't really surround the Olympics. In terms of how we make our, this is a sport management podcast, so, how we manage our business and where we make money is really not the Olympics. The Olympics, if anything, actually costs us money, but it's a great opportunity to expose the sport to more people. And it is the pinnacle. In our sport, in weightlifting, in many others, it is the true pinnacle of the sport. And there's no way of getting away from the excitement of that. I was watching a video of us winning medals and naming our Olympic team in New York City a few weeks ago, and I had this mental thought of, damn it, Olympics, it's got that magic again. And there's others that do as well, certainly. The Stanley Cup final has got a dear place in my heart, as you well know. But the Olympics does still have that magic. And no matter what you do in Olympic and Paralympic sport, to a degree, you're still judged on the outcomes of the Olympic and Paralympic Games. So it's going to be a fun summer ahead. We've got some great things planned in Paris as an organization. And of course, we're looking forward to some really great medal opportunities for the likes of Elite Kiefer, defending Olympic champion, our men's and women's foil teams, our men's saber team. And, I'm not counting out our women's saber, or women's épée a little younger in both cases. But, on our team medal, you only need to win a couple of bouts and you're suddenly find yourself in the medal round. So there we go.
I will be following for sure now, even closer, the fencing in the Olympics.
I hope so. I hope so.
Approaching the end here, is there something I haven't asked you yet that you feel is important to mention?
No, I don't think so. Delighted to be back on. Obviously, we did a pretty deep dive last time into many of the things that happen in weightlifting. And, as you can hear, some of those are just, okay, well, what did we do in weightlifting? And let's figure out how that applies to fencing. I think the biggest lessons that sport management folks can learn is just keep innovating, keep looking for what can we do better every time. But remember, maintenance is still important. I'm no good at it, but it's really important too. And those running themes are keep learning from each other. What I love is learning from our friends in pro sport, our friends in college sport, our friends in international federations, and learning how we can adapt that to what we do in the US and in particularly in USA fencing. And that's where a lot of lessons learned can come from. And I'm really appreciative of podcasts like yours, which allow us to listen to that on a regular basis and take some of it and apply it.
Thank you. And I'm really thankful that you came on and shared all your knowledge.
Brand.
So, Phil, thank you so much for taking the time to be on Sports Management Podcast again.
Thank you, Marcus. Appreciate you.
Thank you for listening to the Sports Management Podcast. Please hit the subscribe button so you don't miss out on any upcoming episodes. Also, feel free to leave a comment about what you thought about this episode. If you want to get in contact with me, send an email to sportsmpodcast@gmail.com or hit me up on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram @sportsmpodcast.